Thanks very much, Oksana. And I hope everyone's been enjoying the event so far. Hopefully everyone's gotten a lot of great information. Again, my name is Simon Gatto. I am the Manager of Business Development here at Comalatech. Comalatech is one of Atlassian's marketplace add-on providers. I guess for now we will call them app providers. So we do a number of different Confluence and Jira apps. But today we're going to be talking a little bit about one of our add-ons or apps, which is Comala Workflows, and how we can really help you take your Confluence a little bit further, do a little bit more with how you're managing your documentation in Confluence using our Comala Workflows tool. So in 2017, we don't think a lot about how we collaborate with one another. Obviously, we talk a lot about collaboration, but how we actually do it, we don't think about it a lot because it's really easy. We don't have to think about it because we're doing it all the time on our phones, with Skype, with different products like the Atlassian tools. Allows it to be very easy to collaborate with one another, no matter where we happen to be, whether we're in the same office or whether we're in different offices distributed in different cities, even in different countries. So it's very easy for us to do that. But it wasn't long ago that it wasn't quite that easy to collaborate with one another. We don't have to go back very far to a time when collaboration was a lot more difficult. The technology wasn't there. In fact, I can recall in my younger days, one of my earliest jobs, working at a software company, doing IT support, and the company did have email. It was just early on in the days of email. File sharing didn't exist. Sending large attachments was very difficult. So collaboration was really limited, and the most technologically advanced tool that we had for collaborating was this. Some of you may recognize the Interdepartmental email or mail envelope. So you would, if you wanted someone to review a document, you would put it in the envelope and you would send it to them. They would mark it up and they would send it back a few days later, and you would see what they had said. So obviously things have changed a lot. Email improved. We started to see file sharing options become available. And ultimately, we did start to see different corporate wikis showing up on the scene. And of course, one of the most influential of all of the corporate wikis was Confluence from Atlassian. So Confluence really was a game changer for companies. This allowed organizations to start collaborating on documentation easily, openly. People could add comments, they could add content. It didn't matter where they were. They could be in the same office. They might be in different offices in the same country. They might be in different countries scattered around the world. So Confluence really changed the way that companies started producing documentation. Made it much easier to collaborate. But with this really open collaboration, of course, there were some fears. The organization started to realize, well, hey, we've got all these people collaborating on these documents, adding content. How do we know when the document's ready? How do we know when it's finished? Do we know someone's actually looked it over to make sure that it's accurate? If you've got 5 different people all working on it, how do you know when it's actually done? So this was the inspiration that our founder, Roberto Dominguez, had for creating the Comala Workflows app. So really, we wanted to create a tool that would allow you to be able to add the necessary approval and review steps to ensure that your users can continue to collaborate openly with their documentation, but still have some control over that document so that things like this didn't happen if a page was published before it was really properly reviewed and approved. So why workflows? We've been talking a little bit about that already, and I think to explain why workflows, we really need to look at how workflows works. What does it actually do? To explain that, I've got a diagram that I'm going to show you guys. Now you may be thinking, Simon, you've got the wrong slide. You've got a Jira slide there. You made a mistake, and that's not the case. Actually, most of the people that I talk to, that we work with, and in many cases, if they're not familiar with our tool, they may not even be using Confluence, but in many cases, people in the Atlassian ecosystem, they're using Jira. Some of them are using Jira with Confluence, but most people are using Jira, I find. And they're very familiar with the concept of, you can see this diagram, this is a Jira workflow. This is a very excellent way of being able to manage the life cycle of one of your Jira issues from beginning to end. So from when it gets opened, any modifications, if it gets reopened, up to the point where it's resolved. So this is a great way. This is a basic example a Jira workflow, this is a really excellent way of being able to manage that life cycle of your issues. So why not be able to apply that to your pages in Confluence? So we've taken that same workflows concept and of course applied it to Confluence pages. You can create your draft documents, have them reviewed by all of the necessary people, make any changes that need to be implemented, have them re-reviewed, and have them approved until ultimately you have a finished, published version of your document that's gone through all of the necessary reviews and approvals. So this really applies that, again, that same workflow principle to manage the life cycle of the documents to make sure that even though you have open collaboration and different users that are working on it, you can still ensure that the right people are reviewing it, the documents are being approved, everything looks good before they get published and become available to your general user population. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, a lot of people see that diagram and they think, wow, that's great, but that's probably only necessary for large organizations. Well, that's not the case. We have many small organizations using the tool for very basic workflows. Maybe they have small teams. They still need to have some control. They still need to have at least maybe one person that's reviewing the document and approving it before it gets published. It might be internal documentation. It may be client documentation. They still need some way to control that. So they might just want something simple. A lot of organizations, they need more complex requirements. They have workflows that require multiple different groups, different people, a lot of different steps that might be involved. So they may be more complex. Not because they're a large organization, it just depends on the lifecycle management that they want to use. So they might create something more complex. And workflows really gives you the flexibility to create your workflows however you want. So it will allow you to design them, whether they're basic, whether they're more complex. We have built-in ones as well that you can modify. So we wanted to provide that flexibility to really create the workflows however you need them, to create as many different workflows as you need if you have different types of documents that you're tracking. So some of the different and sort of common requirements that we see on this slide, some of the different things that we've come across and have really tried to promote workflows to be able to use these. We have companies that are using it that require approvals from multiple users in multiple different groups across the organization. Some of our customers have much more complex life cycles requiring additional security controls. So they want to make sure that only the right people are viewing documents as they go through the review process until eventually they're approved. Some of our companies need to include expiry dates for pages because they have numerous different pages being reviewed and approved. If they're not reviewed in a timely manner, they want to make sure that that process is happening. And then, of course, the last one, managing frequently updated content. So Confluence is most cases your pages are being updated continually. Pages are always evolving, and you need to make sure that you're staying on top of these changes, making sure that they're being properly reviewed and approved, and ultimately being published to your end users. So numerous different ways that the tool is being used. I think the best way to provide an example of this is I'm actually going to flip over to the tool itself and give you guys a little bit of a sort of a first-hand look at how the tool is actually being used. So I've created a page in my Confluence instance, and this will give you kind of a real first-hand look, sort of how it's actually working within Confluence. I've applied a workflow to this page already, so we can see that once you have a workflow applied, what we do is we put the page into what we call a draft mode, and a draft mode is a way of restricting that page so that the general users in this space will not see that draft. So you can restrict it because this page needs to go through the proper review process. It hasn't been approved yet, so we want to make sure that all of your general user population is not seeing this page yet. So we can see, if we expand on this, we can actually see what this workflow is going to look like. So we've started off in a draft mode, and it's going to go through a number of different states before it actually gets published. Now, as I mentioned before, with workflows, it's very flexible in that you can customize and create your own workflows. This is one of the built-in workflows. There's a number of them that are available in the product, but you can actually customize the number of states that you have. You might have 3 or 4 or 8 different states that it's going to have to go through. So it's very flexible in that way, and that you can modify it however you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just walk through what this workflow would look like from beginning to end. We're in draft mode at this point. We've added our content. So we're happy with what we have, and we're ready for this to go into the initial step in the review process. So I can simply click that it's ready. It moves to the next step. So the first step in this one is an actual review process. Now, the workflows also allow you to define which users or groups in Confluence you want to have review and approve this page. So at this point, we can see this has actually been assigned to a group from Confluence. So we're using Confluence users and groups. You don't have to create your own users separately for workflows. We're going to pull them directly from Confluence. So this has been assigned to a member of the page reviewers group, or to that group in general. I happen to be a member of that group. In a lot of cases, the person creating it, they may not be the person that's reviewing it, but in this case, I do happen to be a member of that group. So I'm going to go ahead and approve it. Normally this would be done by another user, but for the sake of the presentation, it's a little bit easier than jumping back and forth. So I can go ahead and approve it. I can add a comment before I approve it. Send it. So just add a comment, a little bit of information about the review or the approval. If there are specific details that you want to include, you can include those here as well, and we can approve that. And we can see now it's gone to the first step, the first review step. So it's been reviewed, but it hasn't been published yet. This was just the first step in the review because this particular workflow has a couple of different steps that are going to need to happen before it gets published. So we can see it's been reviewed. The next step is that it gets sent automatically to our editor-in-chief. So this is the boss, the man that has to approve all pages that are submitted. He will get notification. So we are using notification through Confluence. You can also have an email notification sent to any of your page approvers to let them know that they've been assigned to approve a page. So again, this would normally be done by your editor-in-chief, but I'm going to do it myself just to demonstrate what it would look like. Again, they can also add a comment. Let's publish and approve. So we can see now, once it turns green and it indicates that it's published, this page will now be visible to your view-only users for this space. So your general user population will now be able to see this page because it's gone through all of the necessary steps in your workflow for review before it gets published. So we've had all of the necessary people involved that have provided their review, and now it's available for your staff. We can see that it's published. However, I mentioned before, Confluence pages are typically evolving all the time. They're constantly being updated. So if I needed to go back in as the page creator, maybe I needed to make some changes, some updates. We can see that it's put this page back into that ready state because, of course, we've made changes to the document, and the changes need to be reviewed and approved. But we still have the last published version, which is going to be available to all of your users. So a very important concept with workflows is that we'll maintain a draft and a published version of your document. So you don't have to lock down the page while you're making your changes. You don't have to hide it from your users. While you're making those updates, they will still have access to the originally published version without the changes, you'll notice. But as the page creator, I can go in, I can continue to make my updates. Once I'm happy with those changes, then I can, of course, put that back through the review process. So every time the page gets created, we're maintaining and we're making sure that any changes, any additions that are being made are also being reviewed properly and approved by the necessary people. So this is how we're able to allow you to work in draft in the background and continue to have your documentation available, because the documentation is important. You probably don't want to have to take it away from your users every time you want to make an update. As we go through the documentation or through the approval process as well, we're also keeping a detailed list of the activity so we can actually see exactly what's happened to this page throughout the life cycle of it. So who's approved it, when it was updated, when it was approved. So we're also maintaining that information so that if you ever do need to go back and find out exactly what's happened, you can see that in the page activity. So that's just an example of one type of workflow. This is a very common use case. A lot of our customers are using this type of workflow. But again, we provide the flexibility and the ability to
either create your own workflows from scratch, or you can even modify the existing workflows that we have available. So I'm going to jump back into my presentation now. So those are some of the common requirements, and we saw a few of those features that we're seeing here in that example that I just showed you. Something else that's become much more prominent in the last few years as well for us, and many of you are probably seeing this also where you are, is when we start dealing with compliance in the workplace. We call them controlled documents. You guys may use a similar term, but when you're dealing with controlled documents, then you get into a situation where a workflow is necessary, but not just any type of workflow. Workflows, when we're dealing with compliance, become much more complex. We need things like very strict role-based approval. So when I talk about compliance, very common in North America, of course, FDA, ISO, but there's numerous different compliances, even in Europe and Eastern Europe, obviously there are different ones as well. But most of them share some very common requirements, such as the role-based approvals. Identity between your draft and published is often a requirement to be able to easily identify your draft pages and your published content. Providing an audit trail, a proper audit trail. So we saw that page history in the example that I showed you guys. The detailed page history. We also keep admin audit logging information. So different types of audit the information you need to have available in case your organization gets audited to make sure your pages are compliant. Enforcing mandatory review periods. This is also very common with compliancy, making sure even if a page has not been updated, again, particularly FDA, ISO, some of the other ones, they need to be reviewed at a regular basis. If a page hasn't been updated in the last year, they still need to review that page to ensure that it's compliant. So we can enforce these mandatory review periods. And finally, electronic signatures. This is becoming more and more important to organizations that want to make sure the people that are reviewing the pages are in fact who they say they are. So they need to include a digital signature with every approval on the page to ensure that the correct person has in fact approved that. So compliance is something we're seeing a lot more regularly now, and a lot of our customers are actually managing these controlled documents. So just to give you guys a little bit more of a real world example of how it's being used, some of you may be familiar with Cerner. Excuse me, it's a large healthcare provider and healthcare data provider in the US, but they also have offices worldwide. So Cerner is one of our customers that's currently using workflows in a fairly large environment to manage their controlled documents. So just to give you a sense of the sort of scope of the environment they're managing in. And again, not just for large companies, but for the large companies out there, this would give you an idea of sort of the type of scale that you can apply workflows to. In Cerner's case, they're managing over 100,000 different controlled documents across 2,000 spaces. And these are being accessed not just internally, but also externally by over 128,000 different clients. So this is a lot of documentation, to maintain and produce, but having to actually worry about compliancy, making sure these pages are compliant, doing that manually, that would be impossible with just Confluence alone. With workflows, of course, with Confluence included, we're managing the compliance. We're taking care of that piece for you. So in Cerner's case, obviously, this allows them and organizations like you guys to be able to focus on your work, focus on the job that you're doing, and not have to worry about taking care of if your documents are compliant. So workflows can handle that part for you. You don't have to worry about that. We can do that piece. You can focus on just doing your job. So just to recap a little bit, go back before we get into some questions and answers. Reviews and approvals, very important when dealing with Confluence. If you want to allow that open collaboration, for those of you that are not using Confluence right now, in a lot of cases, the people that I speak with, it's because they do have concerns. Confluence is built on a wiki, which is a very open tool. It's great for collaboration, but it also introduces problems, or can introduce problems, because you have lots of different people working on lots of different pages. So by including these review and approval steps, introducing different security controls, introducing different mechanisms for publishing your documents. Workflows can provide that for you and really allow you to keep the collaboration open within your organization, but still have a way of maintaining some control over those pages by making sure that they're being reviewed and approved by the appropriate people within your staff. So I'm going to wrap up with that and hopefully provided you guys with some useful information about the tool. And I did want to leave a little bit of time because I know Oksana had wanted to open it up for some questions and answers in the period that I have. So Oksana, I will turn it over to you guys if you want. And for any of your audience that might have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, sure, Simon. Thank you very much for your speech, for your presentation. Let me ask the audience if they have any questions.
Ну, как вы поняли, плагин, да, для Confluence, то есть кто использует Confluence, решение для согласования, публикации и так далее, экземпляров контента вашего на страницах. Вот. Есть вопросик. А где? Ага, вот.
Yes, Simon, we have a question. Sure.
Так, во-первых, вопрос по поводу фильтрации по статусам, то есть как можно отследить, в каком статусе находится конкретный документ. И второй вопрос по поводу дат публикации. То есть вот мы столкнулись с тем, что, допустим, у нас есть блог, есть какая-то статья, которую мы написали, допустим, 1 числа. Мы хотим ее опубликовать, допустим, 5 числа, но при этом ну, как бы число остается 1, то есть когда была создана страница. То есть какая будет стоять дата публикации документа при окончательном подтверждении? То есть когда пройдет весь этот цикл, то есть какая дата будет стоять конечная?
Okay, Simon, there are two questions. First one, is it possible to filter out documents using statuses or find documents using statuses?
So to basically to see which the documents based on the status in the workflow that they happen to be at, is that the question? To see sort of which, right. You bet. So there's actually one of the ways we do that is with a built-in workflow report. So this is actually a report, a dashboard report that you can use to view which pages are sitting in which state, we call them. And of course, you can also filter them out if you only wanted to see all of our pages that are in the ready state. So this is one way that we filter them out. You can also use workflows to apply a label. The label could be the state of the page. Some people use it for other information as well. But one of the features, workflows is essentially using macros on the page to apply the different features that we're using. So this is the easiest way to see very quickly. But if you also wanted to be able to search on different information, the workflow can be used to apply a label as well that is also searchable. But this is the most common way, particularly space admins use this report a lot to find, okay, where are my pages that have been reviewed, they're ready, how long have they been sitting there for? This one's been there for quite a while. I may want to get in touch. This is the easiest way to find that, but this information can also be pulled out in page activity, or again, if you wanted to have something more specific, you can use a label on pages, which can be applied automatically using the workflow itself. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. That's an answer for the first question. The second one is, imagine that a document is created and in a period you publish this document. What would be this publication date, the creation date or publication date itself?
The publish date is actually the date that it's approved. So we will keep, actually I can go into the page that I've just created. And we can actually see again in the activity, the date that it will be published is the date that it's actually approved. That will be the published date for that page.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's the answer. Thank you. А есть еще вопросы?
То есть дата апрува, да, реального будет?
Да, дата approve является датой публикации. А вот еще вопрос. Yes, Simon, there is another question.
Вопросик, собственно, в редактировании. Можно ли как-то выделять? Нет такого функционала, чтобы выделить, то есть при перескакивании между версиями, он показал, чтобы вот это отредактировано было. Ну, как комменты, я не знаю, что-то типа...
Я не совсем понял вопрос.
То есть, когда вы там перескакивали, они их видели, чтобы они как-то выделялись.
С ноской какой-нибудь, может быть, я не знаю. Выделение.
Ну, я, видимо, пропустил момент показа. Можно еще раз кейс сам?
Вот он перемещается ready and published. И, собственно,
окей.
у него some updates либо исчезает, либо появляется some updates. А можно ли как-то, то есть если текст будет, да, настолько большой, можно ли какую-то сноску делать?
Okay, yeah, so the question, is it possible to highlight the updated text in order to show it, not updated text, but the changes that the user might have applied to a page, somehow highlighted?
Yes. So the way that we manage the page history, so we're not tracking the individual changes to the, but we are tracking that the page has been changed. But what you can do, you'll notice in the page history, we have the version numbers. So we're not managing these version numbers. This is obviously a Confluence feature, but because we have them attached, any changes that have been made, you can go in to the version history to see which version.
Yeah, sorry, let me clarify a bit. I think a question slightly different. I mean, imagine if you are doing changes in a document, right? Is it possible to highlight these changes directly on the page during this editing?
I see what you mean. So it is. It's possible within Confluence, but it's not a function of workflows. So obviously in Confluence, there you have the inline editing, and you can make changes and comments. I'm not sure if that's what they're after, but for workflows, it's not going to highlight the specific changes to the page. All we're basically monitoring is that the page has been changed. We're not tracking the individual changes itself. Confluence does have tools for that, obviously. They have some built-in options if you need to make specific changes, but the workflows tool itself, we're not tracking the individual line changes. So we can monitor that if the page has been updated. We can also track if there are attachments that have been added or changed, but the specific sort of this word was changed, that's not a function of workflows. Confluence can show you the differences. If you've made changes, they will show you a comparison between the two. But it's not something that workflows is doing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it makes sense.
Стандартный функционал. Но там немного как бы именно в контексте вот workflow хотелось бы. Ну, в page history вот только. Вроде бы вопросов больше нету.
I think we're good.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Oksana, again, thank you for inviting me and enjoy the rest of your